Pine Ridge Cemetery welcomed me with a cool, silent hush, the rustle of long-forgotten trees brushing against the sky. The air smelled of damp leaves and quiet decay, and yet somehow there was a strange comfort in that stillness. My feet crunched along the gravel path, carrying me toward the black granite gates of our family crypt, and with each step, my heart tightened with a mixture of anticipation and dread. I clutched the carnations, their fragrance sharp, almost accusing. Ephraim appeared as I rounded a corner, tall, stooped, his work coat a shield between him and the world. We had exchanged silent nods for years, yet today his eyes were different. His placid face, usually so steady, now bore a mask of warning. "Eva," he whispered, his voice trembling barely above the wind, "do not go in there yet. You need to see the truth first." I felt a chill, not of fear but of recognition. I already knew the answer I did not want to hear. Yet, without speaking, I followed him down a hidden path, overgrown and forgotten, toward a vantage point where the crypt stood in its solemn grandeur, visible through the tangled lilac. And then I saw them. My son Jabari and his wife Niara, moving with calculated purpose. They did not bring flowers, did not pause to mourn. Their hands carried velvet bundles, treasures meant to deceive, to sell lies in the name of their father's memory. A man in a dark coat awaited, and together they enacted sacrilege in the shadow of the graves. And in that moment the warmth I had carried for 40 years, the love, the patience, the hope for my family vanished. What remained was not hatred, not sorrow. It was crystalline clarity, heavy and cold, and it settled in my chest like a stone. I knew with a clarity that cut deeper than grief, that nothing would ever be the same. I didn't cry. Not that day, not ever in that moment. The tears had frozen somewhere deep inside me, trapped beneath decades of love, sacrifice, and trust betrayed. My mind refused to fully grasp the audacity of what I had witnessed. My own son, my flesh and blood, had used his father's ashes, the man who had devoted his life to history, to truth, as a veil over the trade of forgeries. It was sacrilege of the highest order. My heart wanted to shatter, but my body stayed still, cold and silent, as if it knew the storm of emotion would do nothing to change the truth. Ephraim had already handed me the small, worn notebook. Heavy in my hands, it was a burden not of paper, but of betrayal meticulously recorded. Dates, names, license plates, meetings, snippets of hushed conversations, all of it laid bare. I gripped it tightly, and in that grip I felt a shift. Something long buried began to stir. The quiet, precise part of me. The Eva Jones who had once devoted her life to truth and authenticity. Returning home, the apartment greeted me with the stale scent of tobacco and old books. Remnants of a life shared with my husband. It had been a mausoleum, a shrine to memory, not a home for the living. I walked slowly to my writing desk, my own neglected corner, and opened the bottom drawer. The wooden box was there, as it had always been, patiently waiting for me to remember who I was. The tools, the jeweler's loupe, scalpels, UV lamp, all untouched by time. And beneath them my reference books. Pigments, watermarks, binding techniques, the accumulated knowledge of decades. As I lifted the loupe to my eye and examined the air around me, the dust motes shimmering in the sunlight, I realized something profound. For 30 years I had been living someone else's story. A wife, a mother, a widow. But now the past lay bare, the betrayal documented, the tools of my trade ready. Something within me awakened. Not vengeance, not fury, but purpose. The silent, precise, unyielding force that had been Eva Jones, the archivist, had returned. The night passed without sleep. I didn't lie in bed, turning over grievances or replaying memories. I sat in my armchair, staring at the toolbox on my desk, letting the silence fill me completely. It was not the oppressive quiet of grief. It was a different kind of silence, taut, expectant, like a bowstring drawn tight, ready to release. I wasn't scheming, not yet. I was simply recalibrating. Every betrayal, every lie, every hidden deceit washed over me, and I allowed it to settle into the cold clarity that had been absent for decades. When dawn broke, I rose and began to reclaim my corner of the apartment. Dust flew as I wiped the old receipts and papers from the writing desk, revealing the smooth wood beneath. I repotted the geraniums by the window, letting life push back against the decay of years. My books, once forgotten and gathering dust, now lay in order, ready for action. For the first time, the apartment felt like a workspace, alive with purpose, not a memorial of the past. My corner was now my staging ground. It was here, amid the soft sunlight and the scent of freshly brewed coffee, that I began to plan. Not with anger, not with mindless revenge, but with precision. Ephraim's notebook lay open before me. Dates, license plates, names, all interconnected. Each line, each mark on the page revealed the intricate web my son and his wife had spun. I traced the threads, mapping their crimes with a calm, unwavering hand. Each stroke of the pen sharpened my resolve. For 30 years I had been invisible. Today they would finally see me, not as their mother, not as a fragile widow, but as the woman they had underestimated, forgotten, and scorned. By the third day I was ready. The pounding on the door announced them before I saw them. Jabari and Niara, faces twisted in fury, demanded answers. But I did not flinch. I stood unhurried and walked to the door, closing the gap between them and the truth. My gaze met theirs, steady, precise, unyielding. The past met the present, and the realization struck them like lightning. The quiet woman they had scorned had returned, sharper and more dangerous than they could have imagined. They burst into the hallway like predators, their fury a living thing, raw and uncontained. Jabari's voice cut through the air, full of rage and disbelief. "Mom, open the door. You can't do this. What have you done?" I didn't flinch. I didn't hesitate. I simply walked back into the apartment, leaving their words to hang in the empty space between us. I sat at my desk, my small shining sanctuary, and picked up my pen. Calmly, methodically, I began to mark the next line on the diagram I had drawn, connecting dates to license plates, meetings to illicit deals. My hand moved with the precision of a surgeon, each stroke calculated, each mark deliberate. I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. Their faces, twisted in anger and confusion, were etched clearly in my memory. "Destroyed you?" I asked softly, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Or exposed you?" Jabari froze, disbelief flickering across his eyes. "Exposed? What are you talking about? You've lost your mind, old woman." I continued without looking up. "I am merely consulting. The museum sees value in what you never did, the truth. Your import-export empire cannot match the weight of authenticity. Your lies, built on the desecration of graves and forgeries, have crumbled under the light of expertise." It took a moment for their words to catch up with reality. Their condescension, their certainty of my weakness was gone. In its place was something primal: fear. Fear sharpened by the realization that the quiet widow they had underestimated for decades was no longer silent. She was awake. She was precise. She was unstoppable. Niara grasped Jabari's arm, dragging him toward the door. Her eyes, however, did not leave mine. In that glance I read every calculation, every desperate attempt to survive. This wasn't over, she warned silently. This was only the beginning. And I understood. I would wait. I would watch. And when the time came, the full weight of their betrayal would be answered. 2 days later the call came. My neighbor's voice trembled with urgency. "Eva, did you see tonight's Gossip Hound? Sit down before you read it." I didn't subscribe to the tabloids, but curiosity drew me. The page opened and there it was, a grotesque lie, a caricature of grief and madness. My photo, taken a decade ago, cast next to a staged image of Jabari and Niara posing as the grieving, devoted couple. The headline screamed accusations. The widow had lost her mind. The fragile caretaker of a great legacy had become a conspirator herself. Every sentence was a dagger, carefully forged to manipulate public perception. My actions, my careful, deliberate steps to expose the truth, were twisted into madness, betrayal, and even criminality. Yet strangely I felt no anger, no desperation, only the calm, cold clarity that had begun to guide me since that day at the cemetery. I picked up the phone and dialed Paul Stevens. The museum director answered, his voice tense but cautious. I spoke with deliberate calm, my words measured, authoritative. I explained the article, the lies, the deceit, and then, step by step, I laid out the evidence, the license plates, the meetings, the chemical composition of pigments, the forged watermarks. I presented the story as it was. Clear, unassailable, factual. On the other end, I could feel the shift. Paul's initial condescension, his polite detachment, vanished. Respect, professional excitement, and a touch of awe replaced it. He understood immediately the scope, the audacity of the scheme, and the precision of the solution. My son's empire, built on lies and desecration, was collapsing before it even knew the battle had begun. I didn't just reveal truth, I commanded it. Every fact, every observation, every detail of my husband's legacy, restored and honored through my hands, became my weapon. And for the first time in decades, I felt the surge of power that comes from clarity, knowledge, and moral precision. The next morning, the museum conference room buzzed with anticipation. Reporters, cameras, microphones, the air was thick with expectation. I walked in quietly, Ephraim at my side, carrying the notebook that had become both a map and a shield. I felt no anxiety, only the steady pulse of purpose. Paul Stevens introduced me as the new special consultant for antiquities and authenticity. A polite applause followed, tentative at first, then growing as curiosity overcame skepticism. I stepped to the podium, my hands resting lightly on its polished surface, my gaze scanning the room. I spoke clearly, deliberately, each word carrying the weight of truth and years of expertise. I recounted the story of the forged psalter, the subtle deception hidden in pigments, varnishes, and paper. I spoke of the small, crucial details that betray a lie, the inconsistencies no casual observer could detect, the science that exposes falsehoods, and the silent witness of the object itself. My voice didn't waver. I wasn't a widow clinging to grief. I was an expert, an archivist, a guardian of authenticity. Then I introduced Ephraim. He placed the worn notebook on the podium, and together we traced the web of deceit, exposing the crimes of my son and his wife with precision. The room was silent, hanging on every word, every diagram, every date. Their disbelief and eventual comprehension were palpable, even from the front row. By the end, the journalist pens paused, the cameras clicked silently, and the world of lies I had been navigating for so long began to crumble under the weight of unassailable truth. In that moment, I realized that my life had shifted irreversibly. I was no longer defined by loss or betrayal. I was Eva Jones, and the long shadow of others' deceit could no longer touch me. Returning home from the press conference, the city felt different. The sun poured through the streets like a promise, and for the first time in years, I noticed the world around me. The texture of the sidewalks, the rustle of leaves, the faint hum of life moving forward. I unlocked my apartment door and stepped inside, and it felt like stepping into a space reborn. I threw open the windows, letting sunlight flood every corner. The heavy, dusty drapes came down, revealing rooms that were no longer mausoleum-like tombs for the past but living spaces waiting to be filled with action, creation, and purpose. I moved Wayne's massive oak desk against the wall, a tribute, but no longer the center of gravity. My writing desk, modest and gleaming, took its place in the center of the room. Around it, my old books, long forgotten on the shelves, were arranged like soldiers. I brewed coffee, the aroma mingling with lemon polish, ink, and the faint warmth of early morning. The apartment was alive. My desk hummed under my hands as I reviewed Ephraim's notebook again, mapping, connecting, analyzing. Every small detail, every line and mark now made sense. I felt a quiet satisfaction, a steady, growing certainty. This was my domain, my workspace, my reclaiming of self. When the phone rang, I didn't flinch. The Legacy auction house called about a Faber cigarette case. The paperwork seemed impeccable, but I smiled, knowing the truth. My loop, my experience, my eye for the subtle, the imperceptible revealed what others missed. The hallmark was perfect, yes, but perfection I knew could be false. I delivered my verdict calmly, decisively. A single voice of clarity cutting through deception. In that moment, I realized something profound. I wasn't just reclaiming my past. I was building a new legacy. One rooted in knowledge, precision, and integrity. Twice a week, I began leading seminars at the museum. The room, vast and bright, felt almost sacred. Young curators, eager art history students filled the chairs, their eyes wide with anticipation. I could see their hunger for knowledge, for understanding the subtle truths hidden in every artifact. For the first time in decades, I felt the fire Wayne had once ignited in me flicker back to life. Stronger, steadier, undeniable. Never trust first impressions, I told them, holding an ancient reliquary, its metalwork worn but telling. Beauty can lie. History can lie. Even science, when misused, can lie. But the object itself, the thing, never lies. You just have to learn to listen. I moved through the room, showing them scrollwork, varnish, and patina. Each mark, each imperfection told a story. Where one could see flaw, I showed precision. Where one saw wear, I revealed forgery. Their faces transformed with every demonstration, eyes shining with discovery. I realized then that this transmission of knowledge was more enduring than any inheritance or wealth. It was my legacy, my new life. After a seminar, the day was unexpectedly warm and bright. I decided to visit Pine Ridge Cemetery, not out of grief, but out of reverence and closure. Sunlight broke through the trees, casting gentle patterns on the familiar paths. The crypt, once a silent sentinel of pain, now appeared calm and final. I placed a bouquet of white lilies on Wayne's resting place. No sharp sorrow cut through me, only quiet peace and gratitude. I stood a little longer, inhaling the scent of the flowers and the fallen leaves. I was no longer just a widow, no longer a shadow defined by betrayal. I was Eva Jones, a woman who had reclaimed her dignity, her name, and her future. A quiet strength pulsed through me, steady and unshakable. From that day on, my apartment no longer felt like a mausoleum. The dust and shadows of decades were replaced with sunlight, warmth, and purpose. Wayne's desk remained in its place as a tribute, but my small writing desk now commanded the room, cluttered with books, notes, photographs, and objects sent for appraisal. Each piece whispered a story, each mark and line calling me to examine, to understand, to preserve. The phone rang sharply. I picked up without lifting my eyes from a photograph of an enameled locket. It was the Legacy auction house. They wanted confirmation on provenance, claiming documentation was solid. I chuckled softly. Paperwork was always the easiest thing to fake. My voice was calm, steady, and firm. Is the master's hallmark authentic? I asked. Perfect, came the reply. I leaned closer to the photograph. No, I said quietly. It's too perfect. The hallmark is precise, aligned as if by a ruler. Carl Faber's apprentice, slight vision defect. His work always slanted subtly. Yours is flawless. It's modern, not historic. Silence followed. Then a stunned, almost fearful pause. Yes, I said, my words deliberate and precise. Inform your client. The provenance is false. The object itself does not lie. I hung up and returned to my tools. Each time I picked up my jeweler's loupe, each time I traced pigments or traced marks, I felt myself reclaiming the identity I had buried under decades of grief and resignation. I was not a widow clinging to memory. I was a guardian, a scholar, a force that even deceit could not escape. Twice a week I spoke to the young curators, passing on not just knowledge, but respect for truth. They listened, absorbed, and marveled. They hung on every word as if learning the sacred rhythm of history itself. And in each seminar, each careful lecture, I felt Wayme's legacy alive, carried forward not just in memory, but in the spark of curiosity and precision I now nurtured in others. The day of the press conference arrived with an unexpected clarity. I walked into the museum hall, my heart steady, my hands calm. Ephraim was beside me, silent and reliable as ever. The room buzzed with anticipation. Cameras flashing, journalists murmuring, each person expecting another tale of grief, confusion, or scandal. But I was not that woman anymore. I had shed the widow, the ignored mother, the timid archivist. Today I was Eva Jones, the expert, the guardian of truth. Paul Stevens approached the podium first, commanding attention, his voice echoing through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we have called you here for a matter of utmost importance. Preservation of cultural heritage is our mission, and today we recognize an invaluable contribution to this cause." His eyes found mine, and he gestured toward me. I rose, each step deliberate, feeling the weight of years, betrayals, and silent strength. I spoke slowly, clearly, without notes. I revealed the details: titanium dioxide in the varnish, the subtle imperfections of forgery, the meticulous documentation Ephraim had collected. Each word carried the weight of truth, each fact a dagger piercing the illusions Jabari and Niara had spun. The hall fell silent. Journalists lowered their pens, cameras paused mid-flash. I was not a victim. I was the authority, the instrument through which justice, subtle and unyielding, would prevail. Then I introduced Ephraim. He placed his worn notebook on the podium, his quiet presence amplifying the gravity of the moment. "I just did what I had to do," he said. And in that instant, two worlds shifted. Across the city, two unmarked cars pulled up at my son and his wife's residence. The law was no longer distant. The past could no longer be ignored. My heart remained calm, but a deep, unshakable satisfaction settled in. The reckoning was underway. After the press conference, the air felt different, lighter, almost breathable. The chaos of cameras, questions, and flashing lights had receded, leaving a calm that felt both strange and liberating. Paul's assistant leaned toward me, whispering the news. Jabari and Niara had been apprehended while attempting to flee. I nodded slowly, feeling none of the triumph one might expect. There was no joy, no glee. Only the quiet satisfaction of inevitability. Justice had taken its course, precise and unyielding, without the need for spectacle or vengeance. Returning home, I opened every window, letting sunlight pour into the apartment for the first time in decades. The heavy drapes fell away, the stale air replaced by the scent of fresh lemon polish, brewed coffee, and the ink of new catalogs. My apartment, once a mausoleum frozen in memory, was alive again. Wayme's books still stood on the shelves, a silent tribute, but now my own work, my monographs, my reference guides, claimed space beside them. My writing desk, polished and organized, became the heart of a living, breathing workspace. I picked up the phone, examining a photograph of an enameled locket with my loupe. The call from the auction house confirmed what I already suspected. Another forgery, expertly crafted, but flawed in ways only a true expert could see. My voice was calm, unwavering, as I instructed them to reject it. Twice a week, I now lectured at the museum. I shared my knowledge, my passion, my respect for authenticity with young curators and art historians, igniting the same spark in them that Wayme had once sparked in me. That afternoon the city was warm, the sun casting gentle light through the cemetery's foliage. I walked the familiar path to the crypt, carrying a bouquet of white lilies. Everything was in its place. The granite door closed forever, holding peace within. For the first time in decades, my heart was quiet. I whispered to Wayne, gratitude and calm mingling in my voice. And as I left, Ephraim's silent nod reminded me that some alliances transcend words, that some acts of loyalty endure beyond time. I walked out of the cemetery into sunlight, into life, as Eva Jones, free, restored, and whole. The next days felt surreal, as though I were living in a world I had only glimpsed in fragments of memory. Each morning I rose early, brewed strong coffee, and approached my writing desk with a reverence I hadn't felt in decades. The apartment had transformed into a sanctuary of purpose. Light danced across the polished surfaces, glinting off stacks of reference books, photographs, and meticulous notes. Every corner spoke of intention and clarity, a testament to a life reclaimed. I immersed myself in research, connecting with collectors, curators, and historians across the country. Each phone call, each document examined, reinforced my sense of authority. What had once been hobbies, pigments, watermarks, binding techniques, had become a professional arsenal. I reveled in the precision of my work, the clarity of my judgment, the quiet power of knowledge restored. No longer a widow defined by grief, no longer a mother burdened by betrayal. I was Eva Jones, the archivist, the expert, the force to be reckoned with. Twice a week, the museum became my stage. Students leaned forward, eyes wide with curiosity and hunger. I guided their hands, taught them to read the subtle voice of objects, to understand the hidden stories that only patience and care could reveal. Never trust first impressions, I told them. History lies. Beauty lies. Science can be twisted. But the object itself never lies, if you know how to listen. Watching them, I felt an echo of Wayne's pride, the same spark of passion he had once ignited in me. Outside the classroom, the city moved on. Yet I moved through it differently now, with purpose, with clarity, with resolve. My past, once a cage of sorrow and betrayal, had become the foundation of my new life. And though shadows lingered in memory, they no longer controlled me. I walked through streets bathed in sunlight, breathing in the scent of possibility, each step a quiet declaration. I had survived, I had reclaimed myself, and I was unstoppable. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, I felt my old life dissolve further, replaced by this new rhythm of purpose and clarity. My mornings began with meticulous review of archives and private collections, connecting the dots that others had ignored. The once overlooked minutiae, the slight tilt of a hallmark, the faint discoloration in a manuscript, the peculiar patina of a gilded frame, became my language, my code, my power. I felt alive in ways I hadn't imagined since Wayne's passing. The students at the museum became my silent companions in this journey. I watched as their eyes lit up with understanding, as they held ancient objects with reverence and curiosity. I would lean in, whispering guidance. Feel the weight, trace the texture, notice the imperfections. Authenticity is never perfect. It carries the fingerprints of humanity itself. Their awe reminded me of the spark Wayne had ignited in me long ago. A spark now reignited within myself, stronger and brighter than ever. And yet, despite this outward engagement, the memories of betrayal lingered, etched in the corners of my mind. Jabari and Niara had not disappeared entirely from my thoughts. Their faces, twisted with greed and disbelief, still haunted the quiet moments before sleep. But their fear, their panic, their exposure of the lies they had woven, it no longer fueled anger. It fueled a cold, measured satisfaction, a quiet justice delivered not through vengeance alone, but through the reclamation of life, dignity, and knowledge. I found joy in the subtle victories: a fraudulent piece halted, a forgery exposed, a young curator enlightened. The city itself seemed different when I walked its streets. The sun felt warmer, the shadows gentler, the air infused with possibility. I realized that my power no longer lay in anger or revenge, but in wisdom, skill, and patience. I had become a force built not to destroy, but to reveal truth, to illuminate what had been obscured, to honor what had been lost. One crisp morning I walked along the streets carrying a bundle of documents and photographs, the tools of my trade tucked carefully in my bag. The city buzzed with life around me, indifferent and chaotic, yet for the first time in decades, I felt utterly at peace amidst its motion. The betrayal, the sorrow, the long years of silent mourning. All of it had forged me into someone new, someone unbreakable. I had become Eva Jones again, but stronger, wiser, and infinitely more precise. At the museum, the work never ceased. Each day brought a new discovery, a new artifact requiring scrutiny, a new mind to guide. I spent hours analyzing manuscripts, consulting with Ephraim, writing detailed reports, and lecturing young historians. With every session, I felt the invisible threads of my old life reconnect, this time intertwined with purpose and clarity. I watched as the students' eyes widened, as they questioned assumptions, challenged forgery, and learned that knowledge was a weapon and truth a sanctuary. I realized that my legacy, once tied solely to Wayne's brilliance, was now my own. And yet, even in these moments of triumph, the shadows of the past lingered. Jabari and Niara's names would occasionally cross my mind, their schemes and lies serving as a reminder of human frailty and greed. But instead of anger, I felt something sharper: resolve. I had chosen the path of meticulous justice, quiet but unstoppable, and in doing so, I had honored Wayne's memory more faithfully than any act of rage could have. That afternoon, after another seminar, I returned home and paused at my window. Sunlight poured into the apartment, illuminating my desk, the spread of reference books, the photographs and notes meticulously arranged. Each object, each trace of effort, spoke of control, precision, and triumph over deceit. I took a deep breath, closing my eyes for a moment, and felt the full weight of what I had accomplished. I was no longer a widow consumed by grief, no longer a mother haunted by betrayal. I was a woman in full command of her life, a guardian of truth, and a voice for history itself. The day came when I decided to visit Pine Ridge Cemetery again. Not out of grief, not out of obligation, but out of reverence and closure. The air was crisp, tinged with the faint scent of fallen leaves and earth. Sunlight filtered through the branches, painting dappled patterns on the pathways. Each step I took felt deliberate, grounded, as if the weight of decades had lifted from my shoulders. I approached the Johnson crypt, the granite doors solid and unyielding. But there was no fear, only a quiet, profound peace. I placed a bouquet of white lilies against the cold stone, their fragrance mingling with the natural scent of the earth. I ran my hand over the engraved letters, whispering Wayne's name softly, a prayer, a promise, a final acknowledgement of his life and legacy. There was no jagged sorrow now, no sharp pangs of loss. Only gratitude. Gratitude for the life we had shared, for the knowledge he had passed on to me, and for the strength I had found in reclaiming myself. In that moment, I realized that revenge, though precise and effective, had been only part of the journey. True triumph was living fully, honestly, with purpose and clarity. As I turned to leave, Ephraim's figure appeared at the curve of the path. He paused, broom in hand, looked at me, and nodded once, solemnly, silently. No words were needed. Our shared respect, our unspoken alliance, conveyed more than any sentence could. I nodded back, and with the sun warming my back, I walked toward the exit. Each step was lighter, freer, filled with the knowledge that I was no longer defined by the past. I was Eva Jones, a woman who had endured heartbreak, faced betrayal, and emerged unshaken, not hardened but refined. And now, as I stand in my bright, bustling apartment, surrounded by knowledge, artifacts, and young minds eager to learn, I understand the ultimate truth. Life does not end with loss, nor is it measured by suffering. It is measured by courage, by the ability to rise, to reclaim, to shape your own destiny. I share this story not to recount pain, but to illuminate hope, to remind anyone listening that no matter how deep the shadow, your strength, knowledge, and perseverance can light a path forward. Sitting at my writing desk, bathed in morning light, I finally allowed myself to breathe fully. The phone rang, the printer whirred, and the hum of life filled the room, but it no longer felt intrusive. This was the life I had reclaimed, my own, shaped by decades of knowledge, resilience, and quiet determination. Each book I held, each artifact I examined, was a reminder of what truly mattered: integrity, mastery, and the courage to stand for truth when the world doubted you. I thought of my son, my betrayal, the lies, and the deception, and yet I felt no hatred, only clarity, only the understanding that justice had been served, not through vengeance alone, but through wisdom, patience, and unwavering precision. I walked to the window, watching the city awake, sunlight glinting off the buildings, painting the streets with hope. I knew that life was fragile, that betrayal could strike from those closest to you. But I also knew that within us lies a strength that cannot be stolen. That strength allows us to rise, to build again, to become the architects of our own destinies. Every seminar I gave, every young mind I inspired, every artifact I authenticated, it was a testament to the life I had reclaimed, a legacy built not only on what had been lost, but on what I had chosen to preserve and protect. To you listening now, remember this: life will test you, heartbreak may try to shatter you, and betrayal may come from the hands you once trusted. But within you is the power to rise, to reclaim your voice, your purpose, your dignity. Stand firm, trust your instincts, honor the truth, and let no one define your worth but yourself. Your strength may be quiet, but it is unbreakable. And like me, you too can transform pain into clarity, despair into action, and loss into a legacy that echoes far beyond your own story. Your story begins the moment you choose to rise. Choose it today.